The red warning lights bathed the mining colony in an eerie glow as another atmosphere processor shut down with a grinding wheeze. Hannah pressed her face against the control room window, watching the last wisps of manufactured air escape into reach. The thin atmosphere of Kepler 44 to be, the numbers on her screen told a story she didn't want to read. 72 hours of breathable air left, maybe less if they were unlucky. Another one's gone. Park Temin called from across the room, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The chief engineer had been working for 36 hours straight, trying to coax life from machines that were designed to fail. His hands stained. With grease and synthetic coolant moved over the control panels with the desperate precision of a man who knew he was fighting death itself. Hannah closed her eyes and listened to the colony's dying breath. The gentle hum of air circulation had been replaced by irregular gasps and stutters. 300 people lived in these interconnected domes, and every single one of them was counting on her to find a miracle. The communication console chimed. With an incoming message, Hannah recognized the cold, efficient tone of consortium bureaucracy before she even read the words. Economic projections, cost parameters, total loss. The same corporate language that had built this colony was now signing its death warrant. 20 years, Temin said, not looking up from his work. 20 years we've been pulling rare metals out of this rock for them, made them rich beyond counting. Now they won't even send a rescue ship because it might hurt their profit margins. Hannah wanted to argue, to defend the system that had brought them here, but the words died in her throat. She had seen the numbers herself. The consortium's nearest rescue vessel was 4 days away, and the fuel costs alone would exceed the colony's annual output. In the cold mathematics of corporate accounting, they were already dead. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Lee Subin entered, carrying her 6-year-old daughter, Nam Jiang, on her hip. The little girl's face was pale, but she managed a brave smile when she saw Hannah, administrator. "We've finished distributing the medical supplies," Subin reported. "The Korthok elders say they don't need the oxygen boosters. They want the children to have them." Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice. The Korthok were a proud species, their thick gray skin and multiple lungs making them more resistant to low oxygen than humans. But they were also stubborn, and she knew they would rather die than take resources from the young. "What about the Zelani?" she asked. "Veltar is in the recreation dome with the other families," Subin replied. "She's teaching the children songs from her homeworld. Says it helps them stay calm." Through the colony's central corridor, Hannah could see into the recreation dome. The Zelani communications officer sat in the center of a circle of children, her blue-scaled hands moving gracefully as she sang in her native tongue. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a lullaby that spoke of distant stars and peaceful waters. Human, Zelani, and Korthok children sat together, their usual species barriers forgotten in the face of their shared fate. The distress beacon continued its automated broadcast, sending their coordinates and situation into the vast emptiness of space. Hannah had recorded the message herself, trying to keep her voice steady as she explained their situation to anyone who might be listening. But deep space was vast, and the nearest shipping lanes were days away. Even if someone received their signal, even if they cared enough to respond, it would be too late. Temin cursed softly as another system indicator turned red. "The main recycling plant is starting to fail," he said. "I can probably keep it running for another day, maybe 2 if we're lucky. After that, ... He didn't need to finish. After that, the colony would start drowning in its own carbon dioxide. The air would become thick and poisonous, and their last hours would be spent gasping for breath that would never come. There has to be something we can do," Hannah said, though she knew it was false hope. They had already tried everything. Emergency protocols, backup systems, even desperate attempts to repair the damaged processors with spare parts from their mining equipment. Nothing worked. Outside the dome, the alien landscape of Kepler 44 to be stretched to the horizon. The planet's twin suns cast long shadows across the rocky terrain, and the sky was a deep purple that never quite looked natural to human eyes. It was beautiful in its own way, but it was also utterly hostile to life. Without their artificial atmosphere, the colonists would have minutes, not hours. The beacon continued its lonely broadcast, electronic voice crying into the void. Hannah wondered if anyone would ever hear it, if anyone would ever know what happened to the 300 souls who had made this distant world their home. They had come here seeking a better life, drawn by the promise of good wages and the adventure of frontier living. Now they would die together, forgotten by the corporation that had brought them here. In the recreation dome, Eltar's song continued, a gentle melody that seemed to make the red warning lights less harsh. The children listened with rapt attention, finding comfort in the ancient words even as their world slowly suffocated around them. The old cargo ship Iron Phoenix shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its ancient engines groaning like an tired animal. Captain Choi Minho gripped his command chair as the ship settled into normal space, the familiar ache in his bones telling him they had pushed the hyperdrive too hard again. Round him, the bridge hummed with the sounds of a ship that had seen better days, but refused to give up. Another smooth landing, Captain, joked pilot Song Haijin from her station, though her hands never left the controls. She had been flying ships for 15 years, and she knew the Iron Phoenix better than anyone. The ship was old, scarred, and constantly breaking down. But it was home. Minho stretched in his chair and looked out at the stars through the cracked viewport. The Rigel trade route stretched before them like a river of light, busy with cargo. Ships and passenger vessels heading to the core worlds. They had just finished another freight run, carrying medical supplies to a frontier colony that could barely afford to pay them. It was honest work, but it barely covered fuel costs. Any messages waiting for us? Minho asked Communications Officer Yoon Daeon. Daeon was already scanning the local channels, his fingers dancing over the control panel. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of eager energy that reminded Minho of himself before the military had worn him down. The kid had joined the crew 6 months ago, running from something he never talked about. Just the usual shipping reports and ... Dan paused, his face suddenly serious. Captain, there's something else. A distress signal, very faint. It's coming from way out on the rim. The bridge fell quiet except for the constant hum of the ship's systems. Distress signals were not uncommon in deep space, but most of them came from pirates trying to lure ships into traps. Still, something in Dayan's voice made Minho lean forward. Let me hear it, he said. The signal crackled through the bridge speakers, filled with static and the hollow echo of long-distance transmission. But the voice that came through was clear and desperate. A woman's voice, calm but carrying the weight of someone who knew death was coming. This is Colony Administrator Kim Hannah of the Kepler-4 for To Be Mining Colony. We have experienced total atmospheric processor failure. 300 colonists are in immediate danger of suffocation. Our oxygen supply will last approximately 6 hours. The Galactic Trade Consortium has classified our colony as a total loss and will not be sending rescue vessels. We are transmitting our coordinates and requesting immediate assistance from any ship capable of providing aid. The message repeated, the same desperate words echoing through the bridge. Minho felt something cold settle in his stomach as he listened. 300 people, families, workers who had traveled to the edge of known space to build a life, only to be abandoned when it became inconvenient to save them. How far? He asked pilot Song Haijin. Her fingers flew over the navigation computer, calculating jump distances and fuel requirements. 18 hours at maximum burn. If we push the engines hard, but Captain, that's deep into contested space. The hegemony has been expanding their territory in that sector. Engineer Kim Jun-ho looked up from his diagnostic screen, his face grim. Captain, we're not equipped for a rescue operation, so our life support systems can handle maybe 50 people if we shut down half the ship. 300. He shook his head. It's impossible. Weapons specialist Oh Kangmin leaned against the bulkhead, his scarred face unreadable. He was the oldest member of the crew, a former military man who had seen too much combat to believe in easy solutions. Even if we could carry them, how do we get past the hegemony? They don't like independent ships in their space, especially not ones interfering with consortium business. Minho stared at the star chart on the main screen. showing the location of Kepler-4 to be as a tiny red dot in the vast darkness. It was far from any major shipping lane, in a region where only mining companies and smugglers operated. The kind of place where people went to disappear, either by choice or by corporate decision. Their families, he said quietly. Not soldiers. Or politicians, just people trying to make a living. The crew exchanged glances. They all knew Minho's history. How he had been discharged from the military for refusing to follow orders that would have resulted in civilian casualties. It was the reason he flew an independent cargo ship instead of commanding a military vessel, and it was the reason his crew followed him. Captain Daon said softly. The signal is getting weaker. If we're going to respond, we need to do it. Soon, Minho closed his eyes and thought about the 300 people on that distant world. Miners and engineers, communications officers and administrators, people who had risked everything to build a new life on the frontier, only to discover that their lives had become a line item in a corporate budget. Hyjin plot a course for Kepler-4 to be, he said, his voice steady. Maximum burn. Gunho, start working on expanding our life support capacity. Strip whatever you need from non-essential systems. Captain, this is suicide, Kangman protested. We're flying into hegemony space with no authorization, no backup, and no plan. Then we better make a good plan fast, Minho replied. Because we're not leaving those people to die. The Iron Phoenix began to turn, its engines building power. For the long jump to Kepler-4 for it to be, none of them knew about the hegemony blockade waiting in that system. Or the battle that would determine not just the fate of the colony, but the beginning of a war that would change the galaxy forever. The Iron Phoenix dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler-4 to be system. And immediately, every alarm on the bridge began screaming. 3 massive ships hung in space like metal mountains, their dark hulls bristling with weapons. The hegemony blockade had turned the system into a fortress, and the Iron Phoenix was a fly that had just wandered into a spider's web. 3 heavy cruisers, Pilot Song Hyjin reported, her voice tight with tension. They're already turning to face us. Captain Minho stared at the ships on his tactical display. Each one was 10 times the size of his cargo hauler, with enough firepower to turn the Iron Phoenix into space dust in seconds. But somewhere past those ships, 300 people were counting down their final hours of breathable air. The communication channel crackled to life with a voice that carried the cold authority of absolute power. Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Kang Xian-Wu of the Hegemony Defense Force. You are in violation of a military quarantine zone. Identify yourself and state your business. Minho took a deep breath before responding. This is Captain Choi Minho, of the independent freighter Iron Phoenix. We're here to evacuate civilians from the mining colony. We have no interest in your military operations. A harsh laugh echoed through the bridge speakers. Captain, you seem to misunderstand the situation. The Kepler-4 colony has been classified as a total loss by the Galactic Trade Consortium. No rescue operations are authorized. We'll turn around and leave this system immediately. Admiral, there are 300 people down there, Minho said, fighting to keep his voice steady. Men, women, children. They're going to die if we don't help them. Their lives are no longer economically viable, Admiral Xian-Wu replied with the casual cruelty of a man who had reduced human existence to numbers on a spreadsheet. The consortium has made their decision. Turn back now, or I will consider you a hostile vessel and act accordingly. The communication channel went dead, leaving the bridge in tense silence. On the tactical display, the 3 heavy cruisers were moving into attack formation, their weapon systems powering up. Dozens of smaller contacts appeared on the screen as fighter squadrons launched from the cruiser's hangar bays. Captain, weapons specialist O. Kangman said quietly, we can't fight 3 cruisers. We have 1 plasma cannon and a cargo hold full of hope. That's not enough to win a war. But Pilot Song Hyjin was already studying the navigation display, her fingers tracing paths through the asteroid field that surrounded the system. There, she said, pointing to a narrow gap between 2 massive rocks. The cruisers are too big to follow us through there. If we can reach the asteroid field, we might have a chance. Engineer Kim Jun-ho looked up from his control panel, sweat beading on his forehead. Captain, if we're going to run, we need to do it now. Those fighters are moving to intercept us. Min-ho looked at his crew, seeing the fear in their eyes, but also the determination. They had all chosen to be here, knowing the risks. None of them wanted to watch 300 people die while they turned and fled. Hai-jin, plot a course through the asteroid field, he ordered. Jin-ho, give me everything the reactor can handle. Kangmin, prepare to return fire. Captain, those asteroids are moving, Hai-jin warned. Some of them are the size of buildings. If we hit one at this speed, ... Then don't hit one, Min-ho said simply. The Iron Phoenix suddenly accelerated, its engines roaring as Kim Jun-ho pushed. The reactor beyond safe limits. Behind them, the hegemony fighters began their pursuit, their sleek forms cutting through space like silver arrows. The distance between hunter and prey began to close rapidly. They're gaining on us, O Kangmin reported, his hands steady on the weapon controls. I can give them something to think about, but it won't stop them. The first enemy shots lit up the darkness around the Iron Phoenix, plasma bolts designed to disable rather than destroy. The hegemony wanted to capture them, to make an example of anyone who dared to interfere with consortium business. Entering the asteroid field now, Hai-jin announced, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. The Iron Phoenix dove into the spinning maze of rock and metal, dodging asteroids that tumbled end over end in the weak gravity. Some were small, no bigger than a house, while others were massive chunks of planetary debris that could crush a ship without even noticing. Behind them, hegemony fighters followed, their pilots confident in their superior speed and maneuverability. But the asteroid field was a three-dimensional maze. The Iron Phoenix had a pilot who knew how to fly through impossible spaces. 2 fighters coming up fast on our port side, Kangmin reported, turning his single plasma cannon toward the threat. The enemy ships swept in for the kill, their weapons charging for a decisive strike. But as they rounded a massive asteroid, they found themselves facing not just the Iron Phoenix's return fire, but the spinning bulk of another rock formation. The 2 fighters had seconds to choose between destroying their target and saving themselves. They chose wrong. The expanding clouds of debris that had once been enemy fighters drifted past the Iron Phoenix's viewport as the cargo ship continued its desperate flight through the asteroid field. But more fighters were coming, and ahead of them waited the dying colony and the 300 people who needed them to succeed. The Iron Phoenix slammed into the landing pad with a bone-jarring impact that rattled every bolt in the ship's hull. Captain Min-ho didn't wait for the engines to cool before he was running down the cargo ramp, his crew close behind. The air outside tasted thin and metallic, carrying the sharp smell of failing atmospheric processors and the bitter temps of fear. The main habitat dome rose before them. Like a giant glass bubble, its transparent walls offering a clear view of the desperate scene inside. Hundreds of people moved with the careful efficiency of those who knew death was counting down the minutes. Children sat quietly while adults worked frantically at control panels, their faces pale but determined. Colony. Administrator Kim Hannah met them at the airlock, her eyes red from exhaustion, but her voice steady. She was a small woman with calloused hands and the kind of quiet strength that came from making impossible decisions every day. "How many can your ship carry?" she asked, cutting straight to the heart of their problem. Engineer Kim Jun-ho was all ready. Pulling up schematics on his portable computer, his fingers flying over the calculations. 50 people, maybe 60 if we shut down half our systems and pack them in like cargo. But 300, he shook his head. "Captain, the life support can't handle that many. We'd all suffocate before we cleared the atmosphere." The colonists, who had gathered around them, exchanged looks that spoke volumes. 300 souls and room for 60. The mathematics of survival were brutal and simple. "Then we changed the mathematics," said Chief Engineer Park Taemin, pushing through the crowd. His weathered face was streaked with grease and determination. "We link your ship to our systems. Strip what we need from the colony's processors and marry them to your life support. Your ship becomes our lifeline, and we all breathe together." It was a desperate plan that violated every safety protocol in the book. The Iron Phoenix's systems were designed to support a crew of 5, not hundreds of refugees. But it was the only plan they had. "How long do we have?" Minho asked, watching his engineer and Park Taemin huddle over technical diagrams. "Maybe 6 hours before the air goes bad," Hannah replied. "Less if we're unlucky," through the dome's transparent walls. They could see the first bright streaks of atmospheric entry. The hegemony fighters had followed them through the asteroid field, and they were coming in fast and angry. Admiral Xianwu had made it clear that no one was leaving this system alive. "Captain," called Miner Lee Subin from across the dome. She was a compact woman with the kind of practical smile that suggested she had solutions to problems that hadn't occurred to anyone else yet. "We might have something that can help with your fighter problem." She led them to a storage area where dozens of cylindrical devices were stacked like oversized batteries. Each one was about the size of a person's torso, with warning labels in multiple languages. "Mining charges," Subin explained. "We use them to break up ore deposits, but they pack enough punch to crack a small asteroid. With some modifications, we could turn them into surface-to-air missiles." Weapons specialist Oh Kangmin examined one of the charges with professional interest. His scarred face showed the kind of appreciation that came from a lifetime of making dangerous things even more dangerous. "How many do you have?" he asked. "About 200, Subin replied. "We were stockpiling them for a big excavation project that the consortium canceled last month." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Same company that had abandoned them to die had also provided the tools for their defense. "We'll need launch platforms," Kangman said, his tactical mind already working through the logistics. "Something that can get them high enough to reach the fighters." "The ore haulers," suggested Park Taemin. "We've got 6 of them, and they're built to carry heavy loads. Mount the charges on their cargo platforms, and we've got mobile missile launchers." Outside, the hegemony fighters were circling like metal vultures, their weapons systems charging for the first attack. The lead fighter swooped low over the colony, its pilot probably reporting back to Admiral Xianwu that the rescue ship was trapped on the ground. "They're trying to decide whether to destroy us quickly or make it slow," Kangman observed. Watching the enemy formations through the dome's walls, Communications Officer Yuen Daeon looked up from his portable radio. "Captain, I'm picking up transmissions from the fighters. They're waiting for orders from the flagship." Minho nodded grimly. Admiral Xianwu would want to make an example of them, to show the galaxy what happened to those who interfered with consortium business. The Admiral probably planned to broadcast their destruction as a warning to other would-be heroes. "How long?" "Before the life support modifications are complete?" he asked. 2 hours if everything goes perfectly," Junho replied, not looking up from his work. "For hours if we run into problems." "And how long before those fighters get tired of circling and decide to attack?" "Maybe 30 minutes, Kangman said, checking his rifle. "They're professional military. They won't wait long." The math was simple and terrifying. They needed 4 hours to save 300 people, and they had 30 minutes before the shooting started. But as Minho looked around the dome at the faces of the colonists, he saw something that gave him hope. They weren't giving up.
Miners
Were hauling mining charges to the ore haulers. Engineers were splicing power cables between incompatible systems. Children were helping move supplies while their parents prepared for war. The Iron Phoenix had come to save them, but now they were all in it together. The dome shook as another hegemony fighter screamed overhead, its plasma cannons carving glowing scars across the colony's outer walls. Captain Minho crouched beside a makeshift barricade, watching his ammunition counter drop toward 0. They had been fighting for 8 hours, and every minute felt like a lifetime. "How many more groups?" he shouted to Colony Administrator Kim Hannah over the sound of explosions. 23 people left," she replied, helping an injured Korthok worker toward the Iron Phoenix's cargo bay. "The children and elderly are already aboard." The colony's defense had been built from desperation and mining equipment. Ore haulers served as mobile rocket launchers, their cargo beds loaded with modified mining charges that could punch holes in fighter armor. Industrial plasma cutters had been mounted on tripods, turning tools meant for cutting rock into weapons that could slice through enemy shields. Lee Subin ran past them, her arms full of explosive charges. Last batch, she called. After this, we're down to throwing rocks. Chief Engineer Park Taemin and Kim Jun-ho had worked miracles with the life support systems, linking the Iron Phoenix's processors to the colony's failing equipment. The ships. Cargo bay now held 277 people packed so tightly that they had to take turns breathing. But it was working. The air was thin and tasted of recycled fear. But it was briefly. Through the dome's cracked walls, they could see the hegemony forces regrouping for another attack. Admiral Kong Xianwu had sent wave after wave of fighters, but the colonists had fought back with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose. The ground around the colony was littered with the burning wreckage of enemy ships, but more kept coming. Captain? Communications Officer Yoon Daeon's voice crackled through the radio from the Iron Phoenix's bridge. I'm picking up something. Big on the sensors. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Minho's heart sank.
Oh?
More hegemony ships meant the end of their desperate defense. They had held out longer than anyone had a right to expect, but they were exhausted, nearly out of ammunition, and running on borrowed time. But then he saw the engine flares. The sky above. K-E-Pel ER-44 to be suddenly filled with light as dozens of ships materialized from hyperspace. But these weren't the sleek, uniform vessels of the hegemony fleet. These were a ragtag collection of freighters, converted civilian ships, and retired military craft. Some were barely holding together, their hulls patched with salvaged metal and hope. Others were clearly former warships, their weapon systems updated with civilian modifications. Who are they? Hannah asked, staring up at the growing fleet. Before anyone could answer, a new voice cut through the chaos of battle communications. It was a woman's voice, strong and clear, with the kind of authority that came from years of command. This is Admiral Baek Juan of the Earth Colonial Defense Initiative aboard the People's Hammer. All hegemony forces in this system, you are ordered to withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The lead ship of the rescue fleet was a converted dreadnought, its hull scarred by decades of service, but its weapon systems very much alive. The People's Hammer had once been a consortium battleship, but now it flew under Earth's colors. Its crew made up of volunteers and former military personnel who had grown tired of watching colonies die for corporate profit. Admiral Xianwu's response came through the general communication channel, his voice tight with anger. Earth vessel, you have no authority in consortium space. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed as pirates. Admiral Beak's laugh was cold and sharp. Then let's discuss authority, Admiral. The People's Hammer opened fire, its main batteries lighting up the darkness with streams of coherent energy. The other Earth ships followed suit, their weapons ranging from military-grade plasma cannons to improvised mining lasers. It was a fleet built from spare parts and determination, but it fought with the desperate fury of people who had been abandoned too many times. The battle that followed was brief but decisive. The hegemony forces, caught between the colony's ground defenses and the Earth fleet's superior firepower, found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. Admiral Xianwu's flagship took a direct hit to its main reactor, forcing the entire fleet to retreat before they lost more ships. As the last hegemony fighter disappeared into hyperspace, the colony erupted in cheers. People poured out of the Iron Phoenix's cargo bay, gasping the thin but sweet air of freedom. Children ran to their parents, and the elderly Korthok workers wept tears of joy as they realized they would live to see another day. How did you know to come? Minho asked Admiral Beak. When she shuttled down to the colony's surface, the Admiral was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. But her smile was warm. Your communications officer has been broadcasting everything that happened here, every word, every moment of your fight. Half the galaxy heard about the colony that refused to die and the crew that wouldn't abandon them. In the weeks that followed, the news of Kepler 4-4 to be spread like wildfire through the frontier colonies. Other abandoned settlements began to resist consortium abandonment. Other forgotten outposts started fighting back against corporate indifference. The rescue had become something more than just saving 300 lives. It had become proof that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. It had shown the galaxy that courage was contagious, that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance could ignite the largest changes. The colonial liberation war had begun, and Earth had chosen its side.